You want it? You think Ukraine is winning the war? In which direction is the front line moved, Dan? Has it moved westward or eastward?
It depends on where you're looking at.
The front line is collapsing.
I hate to break it to you, but it depends on where you're looking at. And the ratios of Russian deaths to Ukrainian deaths, it's like 4-1. You just don't know what you're talking about.
Tens of thousands
You've never fought
of Ukrainian
anything.
men. You have
don't
no
know
idea
anything
what you're
about the
talking about.
military.
I fought a lot of things. I fought a lot of things.
Oh, you fought a lot of things?
Just because you were in the military doesn't make you an expert.
In this one, we're going to have a look at Glenn Greenwald going toe-to-toe with Dan Crenshaw and Wajahat Ali live on the Piers Morgan Show. Of course, the neocon Dan Crenshaw wants to continue the war in Ukraine, and obviously the woke Democrat Wajahat Ali wants to continue the war as well because, of course, Vladimir Putin is the worst thing and the biggest threat on the planet Earth, and the Americans should spare no expense defeating Russia in a war that we're technically not even fighting. So let's have a look at Glenn Greenwald schooling Dan Crenshaw and Wajahat Ali live on the Piers Morgan Uncensored show.
And I want Donald Trump to tell Putin to his face, get out of Ukraine. You get out of Ukraine, stop meddling in elections, have free and fair elections. And yes, I agree with the panel. Diplomacy is good, but not at the expense of giving up our sovereignty and giving up our allies, and especially the Ukrainians, who have every right to fight this occupation and invasion.
All right, so you get, all right, let's just assume for a moment you get your moment and Trump says to Putin, get out of Ukraine, you bitch. Okay. And
he will never say that. He's never, ever said anything bad against Putin.
Hang on, and Putin just turns around and goes, or what? What are you going to do about it? What is America going to do about it?
This is the art of the deal. Both you and Dan said this is a brilliant deal maker. I don't think he's a brilliant deal maker. This is the art of the deal, folks. He is the most powerful man on earth. Who? Donald Trump, with the most powerful military. He has allies, European allies. The last thing I would do is what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said, which he had to walk back. Remember that? Give Russia all of its concessions. What did Hegseth say? Well, I don't think Ukraine will ever be a part of NATO. Why are you conceding already? Stop conceding. Stop repeating Russian talking points. Make the threat. Make the bluster. As you said, I think Dan said this. I agree. Russia's actually much weaker than it actually performs, right? Europe is against Russia, and if the United States flexes just a little bit, if Donald Trump flexes just a little bit, Putin might actually think twice about continuing this occupation and this invasion, which is also bleeding Putin and Ukraine. What you don't do in a deal is concede without getting anything in return and throw your allies under the bus. Okay. Come on, Piers. I think you agree with me here.
Well, actually, it's interesting because, like, on the NATO point, obviously the whole point from Russia's point of view that Putin has said to them why he's been doing this is because he wanted to resist NATO encroachment. So the last thing, obviously, he's going to want to do is allow Ukraine to now, after 3 years with Russia effectively slowly winning this war, to then become a full member of NATO. So in a way...
But now you know why Ukraine wants to become a member of NATO, right? Because they're saying, oh, wow, look, we did nothing. Russia invaded.
No, I get it. Listen,
we did a full-scale invasion.
You and I agree about this, but, but there is a cold... I mean, bring Dan back in. There is a cold, hard reality to this, which is taking that off the table is a kind of meaningless thing either way, because there's less than zero chance that Putin is ever going to tolerate a settlement that involves Ukraine getting the one thing, which is the reason why he said he went to war in the first place. So, in response,
why concede, Piers? Real quick,
hang on, John. Let Dan respond.
Just on one thing that's really important is there's no concessions that have been given yet.
Yes.
You know, we had one meeting, which was an agreement to have more meetings. So that moment where Trump says, hey, you better get out of Ukraine, that could still be coming. It should still be coming. Of course, I think we're in agreement that it should come, but you have to have a lot more leverage that is backing you up when you make that demand. And that's part of those talks. This is going to be a long process. And I think that oftentimes there's going to be moments where they just walk out of it and there's no deal. But that's possible as well. But to say that there's been concessions already, that's just not factual. It's also not factual to say Ukrainians have been left out of it. Now, I met with Zelensky in Munich right after he'd met with our higher level officials. I think a lot of the heartache and heartburn that you're seeing publicly from a lot of world leaders, I don't see that privately. I think Ukrainians understand, and what they definitely want more than anything else is security guarantees. That doesn't necessarily mean NATO membership. Now, should we be talking about all this openly, right before a negotiation? You can debate whether that's a good idea or not. But as Piers said, it is pretty far-fetched. What is not far-fetched is the idea of security guarantees. That's going to be a key demand of Ukraine. And Ukraine is at the table. General Kellogg said this at the Munich Security Conference when he was asked point blank, who's going to have a seat at the table? Are the Ukrainians going to have a seat at the table? Is the EU going to have a seat at the table? He said, yes and no. He said Ukraine will have a seat at the table. Absolutely. They've been invaded.
That's what Trump said. I mean, Trump was asked categorically. He clarified. He said, to be clear, when it comes to the actual negotiations over resolving the war, of course, Ukraine will be at the table. What they've had in Saudi is the first time that the Russians and the Americans have got together, and actually Ukraine was one of many things that they talked about. So, you know,
I mean, we talk to Ukraine every single day. We have people there with them every single day.
I just think we should save our fury about whether Ukraine get included or not for when they actually get excluded.
Can I just assert a little bit of realism into the conversation?
Yes.
Because I know Dan started off by saying, oh, Russia's this crappy little second-rate power. We have to flatter them and make them think they matter, but they really don't. They're really weak. It's always a pretty weird contradiction to simultaneously say that and then at the same time warn that Russia's going to start invading Western Europe, this crappy little second-rate power. But the reality is, this is the reality whether you like it or not, Russia has fought a war now for 3 years against unified NATO and the United States, pouring hundreds of billions of dollars and highly sophisticated weapons into Ukraine, and the front line continues to move westward, not eastward, where the Russians are gaining more and more territory. More and more Ukrainians are being killed. There are fewer Ukrainian men left in that country who want to fight. They're being forcibly dragged in there and used as cannon fodder, or they're fleeing and risking their lives to do it. The reality is Russia is winning the war or has won the war. And you can say, oh, you must be a Kremlin agent to say that.
Well, you know, you just got to know nothing about military information or tactics. That's what you have to do to say that. You just have to know nothing.
So the idea that,
which is clearly what you do.
Yeah, well,
I mean, you got so many facts wrong. It's hard to know where to even start.
You can. You think Ukraine is winning the war? In which direction is the front line moved, Dan? Has it moved westward or eastward?
It depends on where you're looking at. It depends on where you're looking at. I hate to break it to you, but it depends on where you're looking at. And the ratios of Russian deaths to Ukrainian deaths, it's like 4-1. You just don't know what you're talking about.
Tens of thousands
You've never fought
Ukrainian
anything.
Men. You have
don't
no
know
idea
anything
what
about
you're
the
talking
military.
about. I fought a lot of things. I fought a lot of things.
Oh, you fought a lot of things?
Just because you were in the military doesn't make you an
things?
expert. I'm sorry to say that Donald Trump
I don't need to be an
is
expert. I just know basic facts and I have all the briefings on it. I don't think you do.
Clearly Russia is winning the war. The Ukrainians don't even want to go and fight this war any longer. They're fleeing the country.
It's a war of attrition with a stalemate. That's what we're looking at right now. That's the most honest way to look at it.
I'm sorry to say, one of the things that I know that you don't actually have to go join the military to understand is that Russia is many, many, many times larger than Ukraine. And that's the reason why the most prescient geopolitical experts, people have been on this show, I've interviewed them many times, people like John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs and Stephen Wald, all said since 2022, Ukraine will inevitably lose this war and Russia will win it. And I'll tell you why. This is the one point I want to make. When President Obama was on his way out of office in 2016, Jeffrey Goldberg interviewed him for a cover story on the Obama foreign policy doctrine. And he criticized Obama for not standing up to Russia in Syria and in Ukraine. And what Obama said was, the reality is Ukraine is and always has been and always will be a vital interest to Russia because it's right on the other side of their border, and it has never been and never will be a vital interest to the United States. So the idea that we're going to confront Russia or go to war with Russia over who governs various provinces in eastern Ukraine is absolute madness.
All right,
President Obama was absolutely right, and President Trump thinks that too.
All right.
So you notice how when Dan Crenshaw was losing the argument, he did the Democrat tactic and spoke over his opponent and basically said, you don't know anything, which, in my opinion, Dan Crenshaw was wrong, and he was just basically filibustering so that Glenn Greenwald wouldn't be able to, make his point, which thankfully he did, right? And I agree with, inevitably, Ukraine stands no chance to win this war against Russia simply based on numbers. Russia's population is over 4 times the size of Ukraine's population, according to Google, okay? And so 143 million versus 33 million-ish off the top of my head from the last time I looked. And Glenn Greenwald laid it out clearly. The front line is moving in Russia's favor, and we've seen it when it comes to recruiting in Ukraine. We've seen Ukraine start off with trying to use the elderly men to fight this war. That didn't work. Now they're incentivizing recruitment to younger men, offering benefits and things like that to try to get the younger men of the country to sign up and fight and be the cannon fodder that they mentioned here in this video. I also want to point out that Wajahat Ali mentioned in the beginning that Putin won't have elections and this and that, and he's a dictator and a threat. Well, guess what? Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, has postponed multiple elections as well. So it's basically dictator fighting dictator. And I'm sick of the United States holding up NATO with our tax dollar money and then also supplying everything to Ukraine that we have and not winning this war. The last thing that I want is American boots to be on the ground, and many Americans agree with me that they will not stand for sending American troops to fight the Russian soldiers in Ukraine. And then when it comes to adding Ukraine to NATO, what are they going to do? They're just going to become another country that's a part of NATO that doesn't pay their fair share. I'm to the point where I agree with Dave Smith in that the United States, Donald Trump, should be entertaining the concept of maybe pulling out of NATO completely. They want to say that the only way we can rival Russia is combining the nuclear power, the amount of nukes that the United States and that NATO has versus what Russia has. But my argument is simply, if we didn't waste all this money on NATO, we could just build more nukes for ourselves and not even be an issue, right? Second of all, Russia has been very restrained in using their nuclear abilities in this simple war against Ukraine, right? I mean, they're winning, they're taking territory. And one of the biggest factors that these Democrats, and even Piers Morgan, who I think is a Democrat as well, won't consider is that Russia is not going to give up the territory that it's taken. You know, the reports are 1 million soldiers have died on Russia's front lines, right? And there's no way Vladimir Putin is going to dishonor those soldiers and their deaths by just handing that territory back over. It's time that people be realistic when it comes to their demands as to what these two countries are going to look like when the war is over. And to understand that the main focus, the main point needs to be stop the useless killing of these soldiers to preserve human life. And as a Christian, I hope the people that have fallen in this war were right with Jesus before they died. And if you agree with that, make sure you hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you guys in the next one.